Let's make a core today that will work for one of my 18-inch prism straight edges. This is the pattern that the core will correspond with in the mold, and you can see that this is the general outline of the 18-inch prism. And then there's extra little bit here and on the back there. Those are areas of the pattern that will make an additional imprint in the sand of the mold, and then the core, like this, will hang in the mold to make the inside contour of the casting that we want to see. If we didn't use the core, what we'd end up with is this huge solid hunk of iron. This is an overview of some of the stuff we'll be using to make this core. Here is my Makita drill motor with a paint mixer that I use to mix up the sand and resin. These actually will be a couple of cores not directly related to the 18 prism. Those actually go with the hollow prism. Here is the mold for the core itself, and you can see that it makes the contours of the inside of the 18. This is a finished core over here, just so you can see what we're heading towards. And this is the pattern that goes into the flask to shape the sand into which this core is going to drop. I use wax to prepare the mold for the core, and I also use a spray in graphite. You'll see that later. And then over here is a scale with a stainless, doesn't have to be stainless, but that's what I have, mixing container. And then a couple pretty important ingredients are the A and B parts of the 1 to 5 epoxy that binds the sand together. And then of course here we have a mixing container. It's a simple 5-gallon bucket. Let's go ahead and put this all together. The first thing to do is to prep the mold for the core. And for that, I generally just kind of dust it out, make sure that there's no residual sand from the previous core, like so. Then I use some car wax to put a layer of wax in here. Nothing real fancy about that, just get a nice amount on there and go over it, like so. Trying to get it all into the various nooks and crannies, and to help with that, I use a chip brush. You'll see that in a minute. Okay, I think I've got basic wax there, and then take the chip brush and get a little bit of wax on it. Get down in those letters. That's the part that I want to be sure separates out cleanly, and because of the fine detail there, that's the part that can give trouble sometimes. Hopefully not today. Just mix it on through, and then I'll use the brush to polish out those areas. First we'll just use the regular rag to wipe out the extra wax, just like you were waxing a car. You let the wax sit there a little bit, and then you take a clean cloth, a relatively clean cloth, and polish up the wax, like so. Try to get down in the corners. so. And then I use the brush, wiping off the extra wax from the bristles, and just polish it like you were using a shoe brush. And pay some attention to those corners down in there. That looks good. All right, over it one more time, blow it out. And then that's where I've just recently started using this dry graphite film lube, which puts a little thin layer of graphite in there. And for that, I just spray it in. Shake it up, I guess, probably gonna work better. There we go. I let that dry just a little bit, and I'll come over to these molds here while that's drying and prep them a bit as well. Because these are made out of silicone, I probably could get away without using any separating agents on here, but I just always do it. Seems like the right thing to do. And do the same basic process that we did on the larger mold here. And brush it out a little bit. And I kind of look closely to make sure I don't see any big gobs of wax stuck in the various letters here, because that would dull the definition of the letters, of course. And let's spray a little graphite on there. I feel like this stuff really has helped with better separation. We'll see if that's true today. Feels like the original spray in there is pretty well dried out, so let's go ahead and hit it one more time. Good. And then we'll hit this. Excellent. A little bit more there. All right. Now that'll flash off as we mix up our sand. And for that, you can see I make notes to myself that I use 72 ounces of sand for this particular mold. And for my cores that are epoxy bound, I use 3%. In this case, that'd be about 2.2 ounces. So over here, I have my scale and this container that I use for mixing. We'll turn it on, let it tear. Okay, so it's teared. And I think we want about 72 ounces, which would be 4 pounds, 4.5 pounds of sand in there. So let's go ahead and pour that on in. I don't know if you can see very well or not. Looks like I'm not doing a great job of hitting the container, but we'll get it. It's not super critical that it be exact. Okay, that's about 4 pounds, 8 ounces. Let's try it again. Shucks, I lost my tare. So we'll put it on here, and what it measures right now is 5 pounds, 8 ounces. So by rights, if we pour this sand out, we ought to end up with 1 pound registering for the container. And it's 15.8 ounces, which is close enough for the kind of work I do. One other thing that I've been doing recently to help with release is using a little bit of dry sand, and just pouring it in here and letting the powder that is part of the sand just adhere to the mold. You'll see what I mean here in a second. Dump it out. sand. Dump that out. How much of these steps are truly necessary, I'm not absolutely certain, but this seems to be a combo that's working pretty well, so I'm going to stick with it. Okay, there's that. So the next thing to do is to get our 2.2 ounces of epoxy going. And that I approximate. What I know works in this particular case is 3 pumps. Let's tear that again. Give it a moment. There we go. 3 pumps of the primary resin. 1, 2, 3. And that registers as 2.2 ounces, and then ends up being a little extra because then it takes 3 pumps of the hardener here too. That's okay if we're a little over. Well, that's right, I worked with that container just a little bit a moment ago. Let's see if it will pump. Well, gotta get it primed. There we go, there's 1 pump, 2 pumps, and 3 pumps. And I'll have just a little extra, and that won't hurt a thing. I know it doesn't have to be that precise. But what I think is somewhat important is to mix it thoroughly. And so for that, I just use a little stick, go all around the bottom, back and forth, cleaning it off, going around the sides, and give it a good chance to mix up in it so I can see that it's uniform in color. Incidentally, the hardener is somewhat old and a little redder in color than certainly when it's brand new. In fact, I think when it's brand new, it's nearly watercolored or maybe slightly golden. But West Systems says specifically that even though the hardener may discolor, it still works fine, and indeed I found that to be the case. So this epoxy has worked real nice for this purpose. And it provides hydrocarbon content to the sand in the mold, which helps with the finish of the pattern. If you don't put some either coal or epoxy or some hydrocarbon in the sand will adhere to the iron and you get what they call burn on, and it looks like crud. But by doing this, it works out quite well, and it separates nicely. Actually looks kind of shiny when you pull the sand out of the mold. So here we go. Let's put our couple of ounces of epoxy in the sand here. And where is my little stick that I was using for mixing? Did I set it down? There it is. Okay, you can use that one. That'll be fine. Very good. All right, so there's that in there. And then what happens is I use my mixer and I just mix the snot out of it. I'm actually going to take a break here, put this down on the floor, and we'll stop the video. There's no need of you watching for a minute and a half me mixing this stuff. So it's not quite uniformly mixed enough yet, but I'll continue that off camera. Okay, this is mixed up pretty well without obvious clumping. So I think it's ready to put in the mold. Let's go ahead and give that a whirl. To do that, I usually just lean that container like so, and then just scoop out some of the mixed sand. You can actually see that, be surprised that because it's not very moist, that it will actually stick together, but it will. And the reason I think it sticks together is because I really pack it tightly in there. So that I think that on each grain of sand, there's a thin layer of epoxy. And if I can drive those sand grains together, they each grab hold of each other, and we end up with a pretty nice core. In fact, these cores made with the epoxy binder have been better significantly than the ones that I made with another sodium silicate binder, which worked pretty well, but I didn't think was as strong. What I'm doing here is just tapping down that first layer to be sure that it gets pushed down well into the letters and the bases of the mold here, so that it still indents easily with my finger. You can see that, but it's packed pretty firmly down in there. So let's bring out some more sand, like so. Put that in there, like this. And I'm going to now find a little metal piece that I want to put in there. You'll see in just a moment. We're going to stop here for a second. So what I was looking for a moment ago was this piece of angle iron with a couple of 1/4-20 studs on it that I use as a strong back in the core. It just makes handling of the core much easier, and I think gives it a backbone that makes it stronger so it doesn't accidentally break when you don't want it to. I kind of bury it down in there like that. And we should have a little more than enough sand there. I think we do. And we'll just kind of distribute it around like so, and then pack it down in. And the best way I found to pack it is to use a little flat piece of wood like this. Just go along like so. And you can see what was pretty well mounted up is packing in quite well. I think that's what drives each grain of sand together and helps them to glue to each other and make a good strong core. When I didn't drive the sand in as hard as I am now, my cores were softer and weaker. Softer and weaker. I'm not sure you heard that with my hammering. So what I do here for the sort of the final or later passes is I angle the piece a little bit, sort of down on the corner there, and then push it forward, just kind of like a road grader pushing sand down the mold. But also that angle allows the force to be transmitted through the wood and down into the sand, packs it even tighter. We'll do the same thing here. Tight packing seems to be key. So now I'm going to just screed off, just like you were pouring cement, screed off the sand. Good. Screed it off so that it's level with the top of the mold because you want that core to fit the core print, that indentation in the sand. Well, you don't want it sticking up because when you close the top, the cope of the mold onto the bottom, the drag, if the core here is too thick, it'll press down on the core and it can break it. So you want it to fit in nicely, just about perfectly even with the top of the core print, maybe just ever so slightly below so that you're not putting undue pressure on there. There we go, and then I kind of pat it in like so, which I think helps that very top layer coalesce. That feels pretty good to me, and it's pretty firmly placed in there. What's going to happen here is when I go to remove that core, we're going to put this piece on, put a couple of nuts on here, we'll turn it all over. You'll see that later after this core has a chance to set up. But I'd also set these little guys aside to use some of the leftover sand. I've got a little piece of bristle down there that I don't like. Hard to get that out. Always something. There we go. All right, so we'll do the same thing in miniature here. But it's the same general principle. I made these little plastic boxes, printed them, to give better support to the silicone mold. Otherwise, I think if I were pounding down like this, it might distort the mold enough that it might cause trouble. And let's screed that one off. Same idea. Just like that. Press down on it firmly. Yeah, that should work just fine. Let's do the same over here. And we'll tap it a little bit just to say we did it. Because these are so much shallower, I think they probably pack in a lot easier than the deep mold like this. But I do know that it's helpful to get those sand grains firmly pressed into each other. So we'll set these aside. And then, of course, this sand gets discarded. It's done. Okay, I don't reuse it. And we'll come back later. It'll take a few hours, probably 8 or 12 hours easily to get this to set up firmly. I have to always resist the tendency to want to demold that ahead of the time when it's completely set up, and that only results in a spoiled core and frustration. So that's where we are now. We're going to take a break, set these in a warm place, let them cure, and then we'll demold it later on today.